topic that was given to me was AwtarHood in the light of Sri Aurobindo and Mother. Um, when I read that title, the first thing that came to my mind with regard to AwtarHood is that when we hear of AwtarHood in the traditional sense, we're reminded of the verses from the Gita, Yada Yada Hi Dharmasya Glanirvavati Bharata Abhyuthanam Dharmasya. And I remembered that Sri Aurobindo has laid great emphasis on sort of correcting a misconception that this is the main object of AwtarHood. It is one of the objectives. I mean, the verses Yada Yada Hi Dharmasya Glanir Bhavati Bharata Abhyuthanam Adharmasya Tadatmanam Tujamyaham Paritranaaya Sadhunam Vinashaya Ch Dushkritam Dharma Sansthapanarthaya Sambhavami Yuge. Right? The TV serial in the early 90s, in the beginning of that, this used to come. So practically, the whole country sort of, it is one of the things that is achieved, right? But very importantly, what he says is, and I'll share the relevant quotations from the essays on the Gita, the object of AwtarHood is to take evolution to the next level. I'll put it in Mother's exact words. She says, an avatar is somebody who adds another step in the ladder of evolution. These are the exact words. The corresponding shloka for that would be the next one, probably after those. Yeah. Fourth chapter, verse number 9. Yeah. Janma karma cha me divyam evam yo vetti tatvatah tyaktva deham punarjanma naiti mameti sorjuna. In this particularly, the first quarter of the verse, Janma karma cha me divyam. Right? So, divyam janma. He sort of narrows down on these two words and explains the divyam janma of the avatar, that is a descent which takes place into the human consciousness. The word avatar, in fact, as you would be knowing, it means descent. If you want to further break it down, ava, that is the prefix, that means down. Okay. Three is the dhatu with a re, dirgha wala re, which means to cross. So literally, that which has crossed over down, what Sri Aurobindo calls the higher hemisphere and the lower hemisphere. So basically, crossing down. Karati Shokam Atmavit. This is which comes in the Chandogya Upanishad. There it is in the Avatarati, that would be the verbal form. Arohana and Avatarana, they are the opposites. So the word avatar meaning descent, literally, right? And when you see it in that sense, all of us are avatars because the divine entity in us, it has descended from a higher plane, right? And he again lays great emphasis on this. I'll come to that. But first, finish that point. Okay, the Divyam Janma, the descent of the divine, the main purpose of that is to facilitate our दिव्य जन्म. हमारा एक दिव्य जन्म होना है into the higher consciousness. Like Gita, it speaks of two natures in the 7th chapter. Apara Prakriti, lower nature, Para Prakriti, higher nature. Para Prakriti is called the mother of the universe. Etad Yonini Bhutani, Sarvani Upadharaya. Right? So, in our evolution, there has to reach a point where we have that divine birth, that Divyam Janma in our consciousness, and we become, to begin with, essentially divine beings manifesting more and more of that divinity, and ultimately, the full realization and the full attainment of Godhead in the human being. So, this is the first point I wanted to say here. The, the divine becomes man in order to show man how to become divine. Okay? So, not that I am trying to erase those two shlokas, not, but उसमें वो एक add करना जरूरी है, and to remember, because वो, if you do not say that janma karma cha me divyam, then it's not complete. And I myself am 83 born, so I have seen that and memorized that. So when I read this, and it's not just at one place, there are 3 chapters in the essays on the Gita, wherein he deals with AwtarHood in book 1. Look at the titles. The possibility and purpose of AwtarHood. Next one is even more amazing. The process of AwtarHood. And then the divine birth and divine works. So 3-4 times he mentions this, that the main objective of the avatar is to show us the path, show us the way by which we can ourselves have that divine birth. The difference is, the divine birth of the avatar is a descent, direct, and therein actually he contrasts, few things are coming to mind simultaneously, but let me say this first. So, in the Gita, the 4th chapter is where the AwtarHood is expostulated, and if you look at the concept of AwtarHood as such, okay, first time it is properly given in the Bhagavad Gita. Before that, mention is there, like our spiritual chronology begins with the Veda. So in the 10th mandala, you have what is called the Purusha Sutta. Sahasra Shirsha Purushaha, Sahasraksha Sahasrapat, and all that. Gita mein also in the 13th chapter, we read these kind of verses. Sarvatah Panipadam Tat, Sarvatah Kshishiro Mukham. He has eyes and feet everywhere and all that, right? The next chronology, that is the Upanishads. Again, this is given by Sri Aurobindo in the first chapter of the Essays on the Gita, Our Demand and Need from the Gita, where he tells, it's a very important thing to know. I would say this, if you truly want to get into, if you all truly have to take the benefit of Sri Aurobindo's writings, somewhere that mental laziness which Sri Aurobindo did accuse us Indians of in 1920, it has improved since then, but some kind of scholarly mindset and some kind of intellectual rigor has to come in our personality. We do not, keep just continuing the thought phobia, he says, right? So, Vedic synthesis, followed by the Upanishadic synthesis, then the Gita, and then the Tantra. And the Tantra and the Purana are a similar period. He hyphenates it, Purano Tantric, like that. So in the Upanishads actually the main word is Brahman. Brahman literally means the ever expanding. It comes from the dhatu brih, which means to expand. Brihat word usi se aata hai, which means vast, right? But the other words, the other sangya of the reality, Deva, Ishvara, Purusha, these sort of took a backseat. I'm giving this background so that everything, as much as possible, I'll try to cover the philosophical aspects of AwtarHood, the practical aspects and everything. I began with the practical aspect. So, the words Purusha and Deva, Purusha, the word person in English, comes from there. The word divine in English comes from the word Deva of Sanskrit. The dhatu is the same, Dev dhatu, right? This is another very interesting thing to study in Sri Aurobindo, the evolution of language and the similarities and the interconnectedness of language, etc. So, it's basically neuter gender word, Brahman, and it speaks of the reality in a very impersonal sort of sense. And I mean, essentially, because the time was 45 minutes allocated for the talk, the Gita, in the 15th chapter, Purushottama, that word is used first time by the Gita, and that concept is firmly established by the Gita. It is there earlier, as I said, it is referred to in the Vedas, it is there in the Upanishads, कठोपनिषद में आता है पुरुषात्म परम किंचित सा something सा पराम गति ही etc. But the clear expostulation, establishment of the concept of Purushottama, this is there in the Gita. Okay? That divine to whom you can surrender yourself. Bhakti, in fact, came with Krishna, as he tells in that aphorism. The four great events, wala jo aphorism hai, I am assuming people would be somewhat familiar with it. So, if you do not, it's a simultaneous thing basically. The clearly laying down, establishing the concept of the divine. I'm saying something, we say the word Bhagavan very casually, but if you go deeper into it, mind you, by the way, in the Gita it doesn't say Shri Krishna Uvacha, no, say Shri Bhagavan Uvacha. When the Krishna was speaking the Gita, it was from a state of yoga union with the Param Brahman. Gita itself was something, sort of, even for Krishna it was a peak in his lifetime, which he was not able to repeat when he was asked further later on, right? So, my point is to say, the concept of the divine, the word for that in the Gita, the main, if I may use the word technical, the technical word for the divine in the Gita being the Purushottama, the last 5 verses particularly of the 15th chapter, that establishes that concept of divinity. And much before that, in the 4th chapter, he tells about that highest reality taking a human form. Again, uska jo verse hai, it is not so popular, but it is in that verse actually 4.6 where Krishna tells the process, many hints the process. 4.6 of the Gita, Ajopi sanna vyayatma bhutanam ishwaropi san prakritim swam adhishthaya sambhavami atmamaya. Even though I am the unborn, ajaha api, son, avyaya atma, and I am the imperishable soul, imperishable self rather. The proper word for atma is self. Bhutanam ishwaropi san, and even though I am the Lord of all beings, prakritim swam adhishthaya. Here the key word is adhishthaya, sort of presiding over it. Adhi ka matlab hota hai upar. That is how the word adhyaksha comes. Aksha means to see, adhi means above. So he who sees from above. Prakritim swam, my own prakriti, adhishthaya, presiding over it, sambhavami. In Sanskrit, sambhava doesn't mean possible as it means in Hindi. In Sanskrit, sambhava means birth. Sambhuti means birth. Sambhavami means I come into birth. In the Ishopanishad, verse number, मतलब वो जो 2 pairs है 3 के, in one of those pairs of 3 verses, one of those 3 verses, sambhuti and asambhuti like that. Sambhavami atma maya, through my self maya. Again, absolutely. In fact, there is no need to go to any other commentary or that. In the Gita, the 7th chapter, right? Mattah parataram nanyat kinchidasti. Dhananjaya, I'll tell you the verse number. Verse number 7. Than me, mattah parataram. Parataram literally means supremer, more supreme. संस्कृत में कंपैरेटिव के लिए तरा होता है, सुपरलेटिव के लिए तमा होता है. सो मत्तः परतरम न अन्यत्. Than me there is nothing more supreme. So end of story. There is no need for any. Sometimes what has happened, Sri Aurobindo has said it in his letters and these things. I mean, again, not to, but since we are in a Sri Aurobindo space, then we should speak freely about what he has written, right? We are not having here a. So, in the first chapter of the Essays on the Gita, he says that At times, what happened was that the acharyas used the Gita as a means of dialectical warfare. उसको शस्त्र की तरह उन्होंने यूज किया. And he says that is not the objective of the Gita. In fact, you cannot do this with the Gita because the Gita unifies everything, harmonizes everything. Its teaching is universal. Therefore, to use the Gita to pit one thing against the other is nothing but a limitation of the human mind. He sympathizes with that also, that we get attached to our own ideas, our own mental realizations, our own conceptions of the divine, our own way of relating with the divine, and all that. But the Gita, there is nothing which is beyond the Krishna of the Gita. There is, even in the letters, it is there that what I call supreme is what is called Purushottama in the Gita, right? So, thoda sa wo gap ho gaya from the earlier thread and this one, but he contrasts these two verses. I am just that Divyam Janma, how it happens in the avatar, the divine, as opposed to how it takes place, or rather it's supposed to take place later on in the evolution, in the bhutani, in the beings. For that he contrasts two verses in the Gita, 4.6 ajopi sannavyayatma bhutana vishwaropi san, and 9.8 of the Gita. It says prakritim swam avashtabhya vistrajami punah punah bhutagramam, in which verse basically Bhagavan tells how the beings come out of him. So he says ki here the word is avashtabhya. It's like there is a pressure and there is no control over them. Where here on the contrary, and he says with a slight change of language. Again, it's actually a restriction of time because there's a lot of material I have collected and I wanted to share as much of it as possible. But I mean, this point first and foremost, I wanted to drive home. The purpose of the avatar is to lead the evolution. He says the avatar comes when there is a major crisis. When there are minor crises, then vibhutis are there. Even for himself, there is this wonderful book compilation on AwtarHood made by Sri Aurobindo Society, 1997 or something. I have a soft copy of this. I'll share this with Arora ji. For those who want to understand, this can be a beginning point. But if you really deeply want to understand from Sri Aurobindo's perspective, these three chapters from the essays on the Gita, I'll try to, my main aim will be to sort of summarize them and, whet your appetite, basically. Book 1 mein, possibility and purpose of AwtarHood. It is possible. What is its purpose? And then the process of AwtarHood, and then the divine birth and divine works. Other than these two, this book and the essays on the Gita, this is a compilation from some other sources also. Correspondence with Nagin Doshi, with Nirod Baran, and it has humor also, and some very fine points. I've marked out a few passages from this which I'd like to read. The third is from the Letters on Yoga, Volume 1. Okay. Again, the meaning and purpose of AwtarHood, and then specific avatars and vibhutis. If you read this much, this is basically more or less the reading material on this. It will take some time. The chapters in the essays on the Gita, I will not say they are light reading. No way. Little heavy. But if you persevere, again it depends on person to person. You will get a very, very deep and clear understanding of what AwtarHood means in its totality, right? So this was the first thing. Okay, what is an avatar? Literally, it means a descent. The English equivalent that is loosely used for it, incarnation. Karn is flesh. Incarnation, जैसे incarcerate होता है prison में डालना. So similarly, incarnation is literally just putting on flesh. We have also put on flesh around ourselves by assuming this human body, but in the other sense that our soul has descended from the higher regions, We are also, and this is what he says. He speaks of this in the Divine Teacher, where he speaks of Krishna. Okay, the Krishna who matters. I'm coming to the second practical aspect of AwtarHood, and the Krishna who matters is the eternal incarnation, not the historical teacher and leader of men. Not that the historical teacher and leader's significance is not there, it is there. This is the most important point when you think of AwtarHood. The divine who matters, the Krishna who matters is the. Now, how can there be eternal incarnation? The term itself, if you think about it, it is an oxymoron. Incarnation तो यार एक time frame में होता है, time space में होता है, and you are saying eternal. What do you mean by that? What is meant by that is the constant presence of the divine in our hearts. What the Gita again and again in verse after verse, but the most oft quoted by Sri Aurobindo, the verse most oft quoted for that is chapter 18, verse 61. Ishwaraha sarvabhutanam hriddeshe arjuna tishtati bhramayan sarvabhutani yantraruhani maya. The Lord, O Arjuna, is seated in the heart of all existences, turning them round and round as on a wheel by his maya. So this, see, Sri Aurobindo's influence is there. Like Sir said that, mother's protection is so strong and her grace is, I have also experienced it. I may not be able to share it in this session. That is fine. But what did the mother herself say regarding, what did she say to her devotees? People were getting very attached to her incarnation. हम केवल आपकी सेवा ही करना चाहते हैं, आपका अटेंडेंट बन जाएं या ये वो कुछ नहीं करना चाहते. No. In fact, when she retired to her room in 62 and last 11 years she did not come down, some of the sadhaks in the ashram say that one of the reasons for that, occultly or spiritually, is that she wanted the disciples to find her within themselves. Until and unless, again, this is repeated as much as possible by Sri Aurobindo in the essays on the Gita and everywhere. If you do not find that divine within yourself, in fact, the avatar comes, the divine comes in order for you, in order to make that discovery inside you more possible. It's not just that, he adds his Shakti. Each avatar, he leaves the earth atmosphere more enriched. It's more than that. I mean, Sri Aurobindo's permanent dwelling place is in the subtle physical. Mother said this. Every night she used to spend 2 to 3 hours with him in that subtle physical dwelling where he is. Right? So people, I mean, I have seen people, heard them personally who are saying that we have gone and met him, but for like what he says in the synthesis of yoga, I'm just trying to, he differentiates between the Guru and the Supreme Guru, the Shastra and the Supreme Shastra. I'm talking about the 4/8 chapter, Utsaha, Guru, Shastra and Kala. So this is a Shastra, essays on the Gita and everything, and you can have a human Guru or whatever, but unless and until you find that Lord within you, and that Veda within your heart, the thing is not complete. And that is the purpose why the avatar comes in the first place, to awaken that divinity, to facilitate the revelation of that divinity. Right? So unfortunately, I mean, I'm a very deliberate kind of person in this regard in explaining things, so a lot of time has been consumed. Some of the Okay. When I say this, and I say that the main object of AwtarHood is to help us to have our own Divyam Janma, yes, in fact, when you speak of the divine birth of the human being, in Sri Aurobindo's terminology, you can say it like this, that the ego, which is by default, the centralizing mechanism for the human being in the lower nature. Again, this knowledge comes from the Gita. भूमिरापो नलो वायुः खम मनो बुद्धिरेव च अहंकार इतीयं मे भिन्नाः प्रकृतिर अष्टधा. This is the eightfold nature 7.4 of the Gita, right? So this is why he says that the human nature is shot through with egoism. It is the centralizing mechanism. That ego has to be, it has to abdicate. Abdicate मतलब एक king ने अपना throne voluntarily give up किया for somebody who is a better king or who is the rightful king. So the psychic being has to dethrone the ego. This is what is called Divyam Janma in the terms of integrity. And this is the main reason, again, I am saying, why the avatar comes. This is why Sri Aurobindo in the triple transformation, जो वो बोलते हैं, the first he says is the psychic transformation, and that, first you have to discover that psychic being within you. You have to find it. There is a canto called the Finding of the Soul in Savitri. It is said that, I mean, it is a fact of experience also for me to some extent, that the mere reading of Savitri, those verses, the mantric power in it, it has the power to give you that experience which is, it's obvious, which is, encapsulated in those words, right? Or what he calls the other thing, the coming forward of the psychic being, and that does not happen just like that. All right, the supermind has been established by Sri Aurobindo and all, but still, it's one thing to listen to talks and have some kind of spiritual entertainment. I'm not saying that to belittle things, but when you make that sankalpa for sadhana, no, I will find my soul. Mother, the way mother puts it, she says it in this thing to the children there. Day in and day out, you are hearing that there is something called the soul in you, something called the truth of your being, and knowing that you are not living in the truth of your being, and that some such thing exists, yet you are still going about your daily routine without making any effort to find it. What is the use? My coming here is getting wasted. I mean, little admonishing tone, I would say. So anyway, so the psychic being replacing, dethroning the ego from its seat, and that gradually happens when we do sadhana, when we do how to gain bhakti is the fastest way of the psychic being is the bhakta, he says at one place. So that was like, I mean, to complete that point of Divyam Janma. And mainly, that misconception that the moment we think of AwtarHood, and I'll read those lines from the essays on the Gita, it's not fair otherwise. Yes, this is it. If there were not this rising of man into the Godhead, to be helped by the descent of God into humanity, AwtarHood for the sake of the Dharma would be an otiose phenomenon. Otiose means burdensome, something not needed, redundant. Again, if there were not this rising of man into the Godhead, to be helped by the descent of God into humanity, AwtarHood for the sake of the Dharma would be an otiose phenomenon, since mere right, mere justice or standards of virtue can always be upheld by the divine omnipotence through its ordinary means, by great men or great movements, by the life and work of sages and kings and religious teachers, without any actual incarnation. Okay. I'll share this on the group later on. This is essays on the group. The possibility and purpose of AwtarHood. The avatar comes as the manifestation of the divine nature in the human nature, the apocalypse of its Christhood, Krishnahood, Buddhahood, in order that the human nature may, by molding its principle, thought, feeling, action, being on the lines of that Christhood, Krishnahood, Buddhahood, transfigure itself into the divine. The law, the dharma which the avatar establishes is given for that purpose chiefly. The Christ, Krishna, Buddha stands in its center as the gate. He makes through himself the way men shall follow. Right. Now, obviously, since he doesn't mention himself in this passage from the essays on the Gita, I thought that what is it peculiarly that Sri Aurobindo stands for? in his avatarhood, right? One of the things that came to my mind is impossible नाम की कोई चीज नहीं है. There is nothing impossible. I'll read the quotation. It's very inspiring, very practical from Sri Aurobindo. It might jar. He was a poet and politician to begin with. Keep that in mind. He says, I had no urge towards spirituality in me. I developed spirituality. This is from the letters on himself. This thing, I had no urge towards spirituality in me. I developed spirituality. We are all trying to develop spirituality, right? I was incapable of understanding metaphysics. For all those who are afraid of the life divine and things like this. Sri Aurobindo is saying, I was incapable of understanding metaphysics. I developed into a philosopher. I had no eye for painting. I developed it by yoga. This happened in the jail. Now, I transformed my nature from what it was to what it was not. This is what we have to do. And look again, I transformed my nature from what it was to what it was not. I did it by a special manner, not by a miracle, and I did it to show what could be done and how it could be done. The how is the integral yoga, the process. I did not do it out of any personal necessity of my own or by a miracle without any process. I say that if it is not so, then my yoga is useless and my life was a mistake, a mere absurd freak of nature without meaning or consequence. You all seem to think it a great compliment to me to say that what I have done has no validity for anybody except myself. We have this tendency to just eulogize and आप तो भगवान हैं, आपके लिए तो ये सब संभव कहाँ हम कर सकते हैं? No. The same divine is within you. The Krishna who matters is the eternal incarnation, not the historical teacher and leader of men. I mean, I don't want to be scandalous by saying this again and again, but this is what it is. The divine within you. Our life is a paradox with God for key. That divinity, that God has to be found within yourself. This, I mean, if any one take home point, then it should be this: कि मेरे अंदर भगवान है, ईश्वरः सर्वभूतानां हृदयेषु तिष्ठति, and I am not able to see him. Why am I not able to see him? What can I do so that I can find that God within myself and unite my consciousness with that? What am I doing if I am not able to do it? You see, अगर इतना भी take home हो जाए from this session, I would consider my coming here worthwhile. You all seem to think it a great compliment to me to say that what I have done has no validity for anybody except myself. It is the most damaging criticism on my work that could be done. This is to Neeraj Duran. So there is that sort of personal element and admonishing tone in his language, mild admonition. So, right. Again he explains कि भाई inner AwtarHood important है, but the external का importance. So the inner descent of the Godhead to raise the human soul into himself is the main thing. No doubt, as I kept repeating. It is the inner Christ, Krishna or Buddha that matters. But just as the outer life is of immense importance for the inner development, right? So the external avatarhood is of no mean importance for this great spiritual manifestation. This is from a later chapter. The consummation in the mental and physical symbol assists the growth of the inner reality. What he means by the consummation in the mental and physical symbol is the birth of the divine into the human being. It assists the growth of the inner reality in all humanity. Yeah? Afterwards, the inner reality expresses itself with greater power in a more perfect symbolization of itself through the outer life. So the outer has its importance, but the main thing is the inner impact. Like Sri Aurobindo, for example. Okay, 1950 he passed, and he's relatively unknown. If you compare him, if you do that by other people, first of all, the greater a being, the more time it will take for people to recognize him, come to know about him, etc., etc. But Mother writes at one point, उनके volumes में कहीं पे है, that Even if the avatar hides in a corner of the world and nobody knows him, still the work for which he has come, he will do it, and the effects of that will be felt by the future generation. It does not, I mean, it's not necessary, sometimes it is not even desirable that people should recognize it. Now, when you do recognize, he doesn't deny also. So, in this book, Nagin Doshi writes to Sri Aurobindo, he was an 18, 19-year-old boy at that time. So he says, the sentence is basically, okay, I have a strong faith that you are the divine incarnate. Am I right? To Sri Aurobindo. Follow your faith, it is not likely to mislead you. It's a clear admission. I have several other quotations from their works. Here and there, they are there, which proves their divinity, AwtarHood, rather I should say. In this book only, he says that we were not on earth as avatars. He asks that if you were there right from the beginning, what were you doing first of all, he says. He says carrying on the evolution. Then he says, can you elaborate? Look at the reply of Sri Aurobindo to that. That would mean writing the whole of human history. Human history. We believe that both you and the mother are avatars, but is it only in this life that both of you have shown your divinity? It is said that you and she have been on the earth constantly since its creation. What were you doing during those previous lives? Answer, carrying on the evolution. This is done via vibhutis. Okay? Some of the vibhutis of Sri Aurobindo and Mother, which I'm almost sure of, almost I also should not say sure of. Augustus Caesar, during the Roman time, he says the Greco-Roman culture, the transmission of that to Europe started happening during that time, and it is basically that which sort of civilized Europe. Even the aphorism, if you go back to the siege of Troy wala aphorism jo hai, and it says that it's a great event because it created Greece. And what is the importance of Greece? That was the first civilization, and thereon after the Romans took it, and Augustus Caesar ke reign mein it was carried further. But let me just first finish this and then I'll come back to those vibhutis. What were you doing during those previous lives? Carrying on the evolution. I find it difficult to understand so concise a statement. Can't you elaborate it? Sri Aurobindo's reply, that would mean writing the whole of human history. This is to just remind ourselves of, who it is when we say the name Sri Aurobindo. वो कौन है? Not to take them, I won't say lightly, वो तो अलग चीज है. I can only say that as there are special descents to carry on the evolution to a farther stage, so also something of the divine is always there to help through each stage itself in one direction or another. Right? So Augustus Caesar is one in those times. Then Leonardo da Vinci, Sri Aurobindo actually has not confirmed any. Yes, he has not confirmed. But which we feel relatively sure, the second one is Leonardo da Vinci. And that is because he says he sort of held in himself the whole of the modern mind of Europe. He was a supreme intellectual, and the Renaissance ka wo jo soul tha, like that. It was that man. He was a vibhuti, a great vibhuti. They say even he had made a plan of the aeroplane was there. He had made that. Some design he had made. Right? Acha, Mother ka, they are more clear because they are there to be found in the agenda. Georges van Breckham, in his biography of the Mother, he has mentioned them. Joan of Arc, the French, this thing. Interestingly, in the next birth, it is Elizabeth. So, as Joan of Arc, she is protecting and taking France to its rightful position. And in the next birth, she is in England. And, modern England is what it is today because of Elizabeth I. It is she who sort of set it up at that time. Then the third great nation among us, Russia, Catherine the Great. उनके 3 kings mainly माने जाते हैं because of whom what it is today, Peter the Great, Catherine and Ivan. But if you say one name that way, it's always Catherine the Great. This is all there in the agenda, you can confirm from there. Some are more old times, मतलब Egypt में some queens and all. So, but this time they have come as avatars. Okay, I would even, since I'm, yeah, in the letters on yoga specific avatars and vibhuti section. So, you know, I'll read that. These are two letters at the beginning of the section called specific avatars and vibhutis. Letters on yoga volume 1. My internet was slow. The signal is perfect. If you understand what it is, we will address that thoroughly now. Now, see. अगर 5 मिनट एक्स्ट्रा हो जाए चलेगा? No. The 10 avatars as a parable of evolution. AwtarHood would have little meaning if it were not connected with the evolution. This is his language. The Hindu procession of the 10 avatars is itself as it were a parable of evolution. First the fish avatar, as Sir said, then the amphibious matlab life in both. Okay. Amphibious animal between land and water, then the land animal, then the man-lion avatar, bridging man and lion Narsinga, then man as dwarf. Small and undeveloped, he says. Up till this, it is the tamasic stage, till Vamana. Okay? The energy has not started expressing itself. Okay? Small and undeveloped and physical. But containing himself the Godhead, showing what his possibilities are. वो जो पूरा त्रिविक्रम रूप, he conquers the three worlds and taking possession of existence. Okay? Then the Rajasic, Sattvic, Nirguna avatars, leading the human development from the vital Rajasic, that is Parshurama, to the Sattvic mental man Rama, and again the overmental Superman. Overmental Superman is Krishna. Here, do not take the word Superman literally. Here, it's more generally used by Sri Aurobindo. Something greater than a man. Because otherwise, then you will say, why is he using the adjective overmental and then saying Superman? All these doubts can come. So, one has to be, because as Sir said in his talk, he was not thinking while writing. It's just flowing. So, flexibility is needed. That's what I'm saying. Now, Krishna, Buddha, and Kalki depict the last three stages. The stages of the spiritual development. Krishna opens the possibility of overmind. Buddha tries to shoot beyond to the supreme liberation, but that liberation is still negative, not returning upon earth to complete positively the evolution. Right? You just go to the transcendent and आपका वो निर्वाण हो गया. हालांकि there is no such thing as nirvana. Let me tell you, if you are reading Sri Aurobindo and the Gita, there is no such thing as nirvana. Why am I saying this? Nirvana का मतलब English word extinction होता है extinction. Okay? Va dhatu means to blow. Nirva means you're like blown out, खत्म हो गया. It's not possible. Mamai vamsho jiva loke jiva bhutah sanatana. 15.7 of the Gita. It is an eternal portion of me that becomes a jiva in the world of living creatures. जिसका मतलब पेज नंबर याद है, पेज 445 of the essays on the Gita. Clearly he says, if words have any meaning, then इसका केवल ये मतलब है that we are all eternal individuals. If you are eternal, again when the Gita begins, what does he say? There was never a time when I was not there, or you were not there, or these kings of men were not there, and there will never be a time when you or I will not be there. So there is no such thing as nirvana. What nirvana means is the extinction of ego. This should be absolutely clear. जिसको गीता में बोलते हैं ब्रह्म निर्वाण. This is the same. Again in the letters he clarifies. This is what like Sir was saying in his talk. Sri Aurobindo just synthesizes everything so beautifully. He says what is called nirvana in the Buddhism is what is called Brahma nirvana in the Gita. Nirvana in the Brahman. Esha brahmi sthiti partha nainam prapya vimohyati sitva syamanta kalepi brahma nirvanam richati. You attain to Brahma nirvana, right? So coming back. Krishna, Buddha and Kalki depict the last three stages, the stages of the spiritual development. Krishna opens the possibility of overmind. Buddha tries to shoot beyond to the supreme liberation, but that's still negative, not returning upon earth to complete positively the evolution. Kalki is to correct this. See the word, correct this by bringing the kingdom of the divine upon earth, destroying the opposing asura forces. Like he said in his previous talk, destroying the opposing asura forces. Two of them have been dealt with. In fact, just to complete that, the one of darkness is actually collaborating with the mother. I can even say a further point. That collaboration started. All this is there in the agenda. In the first decade of the previous century, that is when the conversion happened. And I dare say, dare wali bhi koi baat nahi, is just seeing things, occultly. The Arya, which is integral knowledge, it came in 1914. If that conversion would not happen, the Arya could not have come. It's a fact. Again, you can draw parallels that, Gita ka war shuru hone wala hai Kurukshetra ka, and he gives the Gita, and the first world war is about to begin, and he gives the Arya, which is even bigger. The second one, the one of suffering, has dissolved himself into the Supreme. And, that's what I'm saying. Shri Aurobindo mother ke avatar ko samajhna, understand karna. In the previous avatars, Ravan ko mara, usko mara, ye kiya, wo kiya, and of course, it has its cosmic consequences. But herein, the way she tells those first four beings, oh, guys, I mean, can you imagine what it means? In other words, what it means is that now, if we are suffering, it is only because of our own ego. Suffering has been removed at the universal level. वो विलीन हो चुकी है. Okay, that's the main asura. उसके emanations होते हैं. But why yourself be an emanation of that? And it is gone. It is gone. The mother has done that victory. That inner. So, destroying the opposing asura forces. इस पे और हम आएंगे. The progression is striking and unmistakable. It will take 5 minutes more minimum. Kalki is to correct this. I will give an example of this correction as I understand it. As for the lives between the avatar lives, it goes on. That's not so important. The second letter where he speaks about Kalki. Okay? Next one, ensuing letter. In speaking of the supreme liberation in the previous letter, I was simply taking blah blah. Krishna opened the possibility of overmind with its two sides of realization, static and dynamic. Buddha tried to shoot from mind to nirvana in the supreme, just as Shankara did in another way after him. The only difference between them is that of 0 and 1. Buddhism का there is just a 0, जिसको छांदोग्य उपनिषद में it's called asat. The Vedantic word for that is asat. And if you read that, वो क्या कहते हैं? The same conversation between the father and the son, Shvetaketu and his father, right? Tattvamasi जहाँ आता है. So the father categorically states, how can something come out of nothing? Therefore, I say that no, there is no such thing as asat. Okay, think of it. How can something come out of nothing? जो कुछ है ही नहीं उसमें से कुछ कैसे आए? So it's just a mental concept, nothing else. In Shankara, that is replaced by the Brahman, which is one, which is positive, which is a reality that way. But essentially, it is the same. Even you will find in Sri Aurobindo's literature, saying Shankara, he defeated the Buddhists and the times he was living in and whatever. He restored Hinduism and the Vedic thought, but वो जो complete correction था, in fact, at one place again, since we are sitting in a Sri Aurobindo, I would not say this in a Shankaracharya to offend him. Letters on Poetry and Art में है 27th में, he says that this interpretation which he is giving of the Gita, Shankara, it is not there except in his thrust, THRUST. हिंदी में बोले तो ठूस दिया है उसके अंदर, ये है ही नहीं उसमें. So again, it's only the avatar, the full divine, who can give the complete meaning. Again, evolution की बात है. This is like 1200 years ago. That must have helped at that time. Okay, so then, where was I? Yeah, yes. Krishna, yes, sorry. Buddha tried to shoot from nirvana in the supreme, just as Shankara did in another way after him, right? Both agree in overleaping the other stages and trying to get at a nameless and featureless absolute. Nirgun, Nirakar and all that. Krishna, on the other hand, was leading by the normal course of evolution. The next normal step is not a featureless absolute, but the supermind. I consider that in trying to overshoot, Buddha, like Shankara, made a mistake, cutting away the dynamic side of the liberation. Therefore, there has to be a correction by Kalki. Now, how that correction has been made? Okay? First, intellectually. If you read the Life Divine, you will find that at least 20% of it is devoted to correcting the error of Buddhism and Shankara. If you read the aphorisms, God laughed 3 times at Shankara. The aphorism begins like this. First, when he commented on the Isha Upanishad, second, when he went to burn the corpse of his mother, and third, when he stormed about India preaching in action. No, I don't want to this thing, but since we are in a Sri Aurobindo setting, that's why. So, if you read the Life Divine, it's so obvious. He is correcting the intellectual errors that crept into our minds. Errors nahi kehna chahiye. Again, in those times, it must have been a necessity. Without Shankara, we would not be Hindus today. Let's also remember that, right? But it is that Kalki, अगेन कल्कि के बारे में बोलते हैं कि इट्स नॉट कि वो घोड़े पे बैठ के आएगा और वो सफेद घोड़ा और हाथ में तलवार. It's not those symbolic details which are so important. It's the concept and what the work he does. So intellectually that is done there. But intellect is not the main thing. Obviously, the avatar doesn't come only for an intellectual service to mankind. He comes to add another step in the ladder and to bring forces which were not there earlier. Those familiar with Sri Aurobindo, the mission for which he and mother came is to establish the supermind in the atmosphere of the earth. The date is celebrated in the ashram as 29th February 1956. So Golden Day bolte hain. I would say the opposition to that was, see, it was starting to happen around 38 or so. Then he had that leg injury, right? Then again kuch hua, then the Second World War was started by the negative forces. As Sir said, they don't allow simply. ये उनका bastion है, उनका stronghold है, and they don't give up so easily. Finally, I mean, when Sri Aurobindo left his body, that golden light coming out of his body, 6 more years, and he is working from the subtle planes and mother here in the material plane, and the thing is finally achieved. If you read the mother's works, sometime after that thing happens, mother says, now that the work is done, should I come? Now that the mission is, the word she uses is mission. Now that the mission is accomplished, should I come? So, I mean, if that is not Kalki, and it's so clear from reading these letters. And one more important thing. Think of it. Why is it that after the 10th there is a full stop? Why is it that after the 10th and 11th is not needed? What is the reason? The reason is that the 10th does something. He makes sure that now he no longer needs to become human. See, the divine needs to become human only so long as the human has not been prepared, taught, developed, fortified and everything so that he can become the divine. Now all that has been done. The literature of Sri Aurobindo and Mother is the complete knowledge which is needed for you to become divine. It's not just literature. वो supermind को establish कर गए, which is the main thing actually. And it is, if yesterday I'll share that talk. It's by somebody from Bombay and he's not, recognized as a devotee, so I didn't share it. He says he's a guru who is teaching people and all. He's saying that I am seeing people are evolving spiritually, they are evolving so fast. कहते you 15-20 दिन के अंदर they are just accelerating like anything. He says this is because of what Sri Aurobindo has done. He doesn't use the word Supermind, he uses the word Shakti. Sri Aurobindo brought down the Shakti and established it into the earth atmosphere. It is because of Sri Aurobindo that the spiritual evolution is happening so fast. So that is what it is. I mean, there is no doubt. I mean, I read this in 2007, and intuitively it becomes clear, and then you read the Life Divine and so many things. So I hope that has been addressed too. And by the way, like he says in the 11th chapter in the Gita, Divyam dadami te chakshuhu pashyame yogameshwaram. I give you the divine sight. I can be, as strong a possible, a chest beating devotee of Sri Aurobindo and tell 1,000 people that he is Kalki. Do you think it is going to make them realize that he is Kalki? It is only when Sri Aurobindo gives that divine sight to that soul and gives himself, he gives the recognition who he is, then it is going to, and then it cannot be erased. मैं आपको आज बोल रहा हूँ, कल आपको कोई कुछ और बोलेगा वो आर्ट ऑफ लिविंग वाला सुप्रीम है, वो वाला सुप्रीम है, वो वाला सुप्रीम, आप उसकी बात मानने लगोगे. So that is why it's a personal thing which the divine gives to each soul. Very rightly you are saying. This is not supposed to be more, it's not announced by the beat of drum as mother says. So, but here, I mean, sir, Sri Aurobindo Center, and we are having a talk on evolution, AwtarHood, so that's why I mentioned it.